more, let's bring in a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Mike Rounds. Senator Rounds, thank you for joining us. Our condolences on your colleague, Senator Graham. You were just with him a couple days ago at the NATO summit in Turkey. How was he?
First of all, thanks. My condolences to his family, his sister, his younger sister. They're in our thoughts and prayers. Yeah, he was with us. We had a bipartisan, bicameral group coming in for NATO observer group activities there during the NATO summit. Lindsey joined us there. We met with President Zelensky while we were there. He was in fine form. He was working on the Russia sanctions bill, felt he'd made some real progress. He was excited about that. Once again, here's a guy who was just at the top of his game, moving forward, very active. He was on his way to Kyiv at that time. He was going to meet President Zelensky once again while he was there. And he was working once again on his major project right now, which is the Russian sanctions bill. With, I just got a note this morning that Senator Shaheen, who was ranking a ranking member in national defense, but also on foreign relations, asking that might be one of the first things we look at when we get back into the Senate is passing that Russian sanctions bill. And that's one great way to honor Lindsey's long-term work in the United States Senate. I lost a good friend and a real colleague, a guy that literally a lot of fun to go to dinner with. He was part of our dinner group on a regular basis, almost on a weekly basis. A real character, a great sense of humor, but focused on what he believed was right for America long term. And one of those guys who was constantly in touch with folks on both sides of the aisle, but also sharing with us his thoughts about where the president wanted to go and what we could do to help the president achieve some of those goals.
And you just mentioned his sense of humor, part of your dinner group. Can you tell us something about Senator Graham, a story that nobody watching knows?
Well, the one thing that we all knew is when he'd come into one of the restaurants where we would go and have a dinner someplace, you always knew that if he was late getting in, you could always order his drink, which was a Diet Coke and then a Riesling to go with it. So of all the things that were out there, it was always, if Lindsey was coming, you knew that that's what he was going to have as something with any dinner he might have. And he loved French fries. So no matter where you're at, you always had that order extra French fries because Lindsey was one of the guys that he was going to enjoy his dinner, and he was going to be right in the middle. You never knew what the topic of the conversation was going to be, but you knew that he was going to be a part of and sending a message about one of the things he was working on, whether it was reconciliation, trying to make sure that we had a supplemental ready to go, or if he was working about improving relations with Israel, or focusing on what was going on in Iran and the need to have a strong policy position that was consistent with Iran, and then finally his concern that Russia was playing us all the way, and that everything that we could do to make sure that the Russia sanctions bill passed the United States Senate and the United States House, and it was one that the president could work with to really put pressure on Mr. Putin. Those are the things that I'll never forget. Is he was focused on the long-term successes of our country and on our foreign policy.
And as everybody who ever dealt with Senator Graham, worked with him, knows, he had a great sense of humor. That is something that Benjamin Netanyahu just talked about in this soundbite we have from a little while ago on the channel. Listen to this.
It takes people like Lindsey Graham to keep that alliance going, and I'm sure you'll find a successor. Although I think you're going to find somebody exactly like him, because he was unique. He was amazing. I heard you talk about his humor. He could make the room crack up, at any time. But he could also be so clear and so pointed and so candid.
And we know he was basically President Trump's Senate whisperer. There were talks over the years about maybe they're going to pluck Graham for a cabinet job. He stayed in the Senate. He was always telling President Trump what was going on there. Who fills that void?
Good question. It's going to be really difficult to find someone that felt as comfortable with the president as Lindsey did. He was just one of these guys, we were in the middle of a pheasant hunt. He came up and hunted pheasants with John Thune and I and Jim Banks a year, or a little over 2 years, well, almost 2 years ago now. And we were there, and in the middle of the morning, he comes on out of his apartment and looks at us, and he says, I've been spending my morning talking to the president. We're trying to get some stuff done. He's on his way to Alaska at the time, and away he went. But he was just one of these guys who was constantly visiting and staying in constant communication with the president. And the president had a very good friend and ally. As Lindsey used to joke, he'd say, yeah, he says, the president and I, we get along great together. I really like the guy, and he likes himself too, so we get along just fine on it. And so those were the types of comments he would make, but he loved the president. He really thought the president was one of these guys who had a special purpose in the United States, and that he wanted to be a part of making the president successful.
And President Trump has said that losing Lindsey Graham is like losing a member of the family. So a difficult day in Washington, D.C. Again, our condolences, Senator Rounds. Thanks for being here.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.